The Mafia boss shocked by 2 a.m. call. The waitress in labor with his baby. Only he can save her. Ronan Ashford was dragged from sleep by his phone screaming at 2 in the morning. A number he didn't recognize lighting up the screen while his brain fought through the fog of the 4 hours of rest he allowed himself nightly. His first instinct was to ignore it, to silence the interruption and return to the dreamless void where empire and enemies didn't exist, but something made his thumb swipe to answer before conscious thought caught up. "Mr. Ashford," a woman's urgent voice cut through the darkness. "This is Dr. Patricia Huang from Seattle Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery. We need you here immediately." Ronan sat up in his penthouse bedroom overlooking the sleeping city, confusion mixing with the instant alertness that had kept him alive in his world for 20 years, trying to understand why a hospital was calling him about labor and delivery when he had no connections to anyone pregnant, no relationships that would produce that kind of crisis. "We have Claire Mitchell here," the doctor continued, her voice carrying professional urgency that made Ronan's pulse spike. "She's in active labor with your son, but there are serious complications. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, and the baby's heart rate is dropping. We need emergency intervention, but she's refusing to cooperate. She's panicking, and her vitals are getting worse by the minute. We need you here now, or we're going to lose them both." Before we dive into this story, smash that subscribe button, hit that like, and comment right now, because what this mafia boss does when he gets this desperate midnight call will prove that some men rise to the moment, even when they've failed before. Ronan Ashford was 41 years old and had built his criminal empire from absolutely nothing. Started as a teenager running packages for older gangsters and clawed his way to controlling vast operations that stretched across the Pacific Northwest. His legitimate businesses were impressive on paper: restaurants and real estate developments, and import companies that generated massive legal profit. But everyone who mattered knew Ronan's real power came from the less legal operations he'd spent 2 decades perfecting. He was respected because he was intelligent, feared because he was ruthless, successful because he understood that in his world you either controlled everything or you controlled nothing. There was no middle ground where weakness survived. Women had always been temporary fixtures in Ronan's life. Relationships that served purposes and ended when those purposes were fulfilled, physical needs met without emotional complications that could become vulnerabilities. He never wanted family, never wanted children, too focused on building and maintaining the power that defined his entire existence. Emotions were weaknesses that enemies exploited. Attachments were leverage that got you killed. Better to be alone and untouchable than to give someone the ability to destroy you through the people you loved. That philosophy had worked perfectly for 20 years, kept him alive and successful, while men who made different choices ended up dead or destroyed, until tonight when a doctor's voice shattered every wall he'd built. Claire Mitchell. The name crashed through Ronan's mind like a freight train hitting a barrier, memory flooding back with crystalline clarity. 9 months ago, business dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Seattle, negotiations with potential partners that had run until nearly midnight. Claire had been their waitress. He'd noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she absolutely was, but because she treated everyone with genuine kindness that seemed impossible in a world built on transactions and manipulation. She saw people as humans, not as means to ends. Spoke to everyone with the same respect regardless of their importance or their tips. Moved through the restaurant with grace that felt natural, not performed. After the meeting ended, Ronan had waited in the parking lot, watched Claire finish her shift, and walked toward her car alone in the dangerous neighborhood where the restaurant operated. He'd approached carefully, offered to walk with her because it was late and the area wasn't safe, expected her to refuse or to recognize his name and react with the fear or calculation most people showed. Instead, Claire had accepted gratefully, thanked him for his kindness like it was remarkable instead of basic human decency. They'd talked in that parking lot for an hour about nothing and everything, real conversation without agenda or pretense. 1 hour became coffee at an all-night diner where Claire told him about working 3 jobs to survive, about losing her parents when she was 20 and having no family left, about dreaming of finishing her degree someday when she could afford more than 1 class at a time. Ronan had listened and actually heard her, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but genuinely interested in this woman who'd survived loss and poverty, but kept her humanity intact. Coffee became walking through empty Seattle streets as dawn approached, talking about dreams and fears and the weight of existing alone in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. By the time the sun rose, they were at Ronan's penthouse. Not because he planned it, but because the conversation had led them there naturally, because the connection between them felt inevitable and undeniable. That night had been perfect in ways Ronan couldn't articulate. Not just the physical chemistry, though, that had been extraordinary, but the emotional intimacy he'd never experienced with anyone, the feeling of being seen as a person instead of reputation, of being valued for who he was beneath the power and the fear. Claire had made him forget about his empire for 12 perfect hours, had made him feel human instead of weapon, had given him a glimpse of what life could be if he made different choices. Morning had come too soon. Emergency phone call from Felix about a crisis that needed Ronan's immediate attention, problems with a shipment that could expose their entire operation if not handled immediately. Ronan had left Claire sleeping in his bed, scribbled his private number on a note, told her to call him later because he wanted to see her again, actually meant it with an intensity that should have scared him. But crisis had led to crisis the way it always did in his world. One emergency bleeding into the next. Days becoming weeks, becoming months of constant management and control. Somewhere in that chaos, Ronan had forgotten to follow up with Claire, forgotten to call or text or check if she was okay, forgot about her entirely because his empire demanded everything and left no room for personal connections. Now Dr. Huang's voice was pulling him back to the present, explaining that Claire Mitchell was in labor with his son, that complications were threatening both their lives, that they needed him at the hospital immediately. Ronan's brain was trying to process the impossibility. Claire had been pregnant for 9 months carrying his child, and he'd known nothing about it, had forgotten she existed while she'd handled everything alone. She's been pregnant this whole time, Ronan heard himself saying, his voice hollow with shock. And I'm just hearing about it now. Why didn't she tell me? That's what I'm trying to explain. Dr. Huang replied with professional patience, strained by urgency. Ms. Mitchell tried to reach you months ago. Multiple calls to your office that were never returned. Messages left with your assistant that apparently never got through to you. Memory hit Ronan like a physical blow. Vague recollection of his assistant mentioning calls from some woman asking to speak with him personally, calls from unknown numbers that his security protocols automatically screened out. He'd told his assistant to block the number, assumed it was a scheme or a trap or one of the many women who tried to use brief encounters to gain access to his wealth and power. Standard procedure in his world, protect the boss from gold diggers and manipulators, never considering that maybe someone had legitimate, desperate reason to reach him. Claire had been trying to tell him about their baby, trying to give him the chance to be involved, trying to reach out for help, and he'd blocked her completely, dismissed her as unimportant, left her to handle pregnancy alone because he was too busy and too important to be bothered. The guilt hit harder than any bullet Ronan had ever taken. The realization that his protection systems had worked too perfectly had blocked out the one person who'd needed to reach him most. Where is she now? Ronan demanded, already moving toward his closet, pulling on clothes with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline and shock. Labor and delivery room 3, Dr. Huang said, but Mr. Ashford, you need to understand the severity. Ms. Mitchell has preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is at stroke level. The baby's heart rate keeps dropping dangerously low. We need to do emergency C-section immediately, but she's refusing to cooperate. She's panicking and making everything worse. She keeps saying she needs to do this alone, that she promised herself she wouldn't call you, but her body is shutting down and we're running out of time. How much time do I have? Ronan asked, his voice going cold and controlled the way it did in crisis situations, the tone that had made enemies surrender and allies follow without question. Maybe 20 minutes before we have to operate regardless of her cooperation, Dr. Huang replied. But her panic is elevating her blood pressure further. Every minute increases the risk of stroke or seizure. We need you here to calm her down, to help her understand that surgery is necessary. Please, Mr. Ashford, your son needs you here. The words hit Ronan in the chest like a sledgehammer. Your son, not just a baby, but his son, his child, his responsibility that he'd abandoned through negligence and arrogance. He was calling Felix before conscious thought, his second-in-command answering on the first ring despite the impossible hour. "Boss, what's wrong?" Felix's voice instantly alert, because Ronan never called like this unless someone was dying. "I need the car now," Ronan said, not explaining, not having time for details. Seattle Memorial Hospital, fastest route possible. The drive through empty Seattle streets felt simultaneously too fast and agonizingly slow. Ronan's mind spinning through implications and consequences and the crushing weight of his failure. Claire had tried to reach him, had made multiple attempts to tell him about their baby, had been desperate enough to call repeatedly despite his reputation, despite knowing what kind of man he was, despite every reason to be terrified of involving him in her life. She'd wanted to tell him, wanted to give him the choice to be involved, wanted help that he'd refused through indifference and neglect. Now she was dying, delivering his child, panicking alone in a hospital room, because she'd promised herself she wouldn't call him, wouldn't rely on the man who'd forgotten she existed, wouldn't give him the chance to reject her again. Ronan's hands clenched into fists, rage and fear mixing dangerously, angry at Claire for not trying harder, even though he knew that was unfair, angry at himself for not remembering, angry at the universe for this impossible timing. But beneath the anger was terror, genuine fear he hadn't felt in years, the kind that came from being completely powerless to control outcomes. What if they died? What if he lost them both before ever knowing them? What if his negligence killed his own child? What if the last thing Claire knew was that the father of her baby couldn't be bothered to return her calls? The car screeched into the hospital emergency entrance, Ronan out before it fully stopped, his security team following but unable to keep pace with his sprint through automatic doors. Labor and delivery where, he demanded of the stunned nurse at the information desk, his voice carrying authority that made her respond without thinking. "Third floor, elevator to your right. Room 3. She called after him, but Ronan was already moving. The elevator was too slow. He took the stairs 2 at a time, burst through the door to the maternity ward breathing hard, looking for someone to direct him. Dr. Huang appeared as if summoned, relief flooding her face when she saw him. "Thank God you're here," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him down the hallway. "She's getting worse. We have maybe 5 minutes before this becomes life or death. This way, quickly." They stopped outside room 3. Ronan could hear screaming through the door, Claire's voice raw with pain and panic and desperation. "I can do this alone," she was shouting. "I don't need him. I promised myself I wouldn't call him. I can handle this myself." Dr. Huang looked at Ronan with desperate urgency. "She's been saying that for an hour, refusing to let us help properly. Her body is breaking down. The baby's in severe distress. You need to get through to her now, or we're going to lose them both." Ronan took a breath, steadied himself, pushed open the door to find Claire in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors, all beeping urgent warnings. She looked different from 9 months ago, exhausted and pale, and so much thinner except for the massive belly that held their child. Her face was twisted with pain and fear and something that looked like broken determination. Her eyes found him in the doorway, shock and anger and relief washing across her features in rapid succession, tears streaming down her cheeks as another contraction hit and made her scream. "You came," she gasped when she could breathe again, her voice breaking with disbelief and something that might have been hope. "You actually came. I thought I didn't think you would." Ronan crossed to her bedside in 3 strides, took her hand without asking permission, felt her grip him with surprising strength. "Claire, I'm here," he said, his voice gentler than he'd known it could be. "I'm so sorry for everything, for not calling back, for not being there, for all of it, but I'm here now." Claire was crying harder, contractions coming faster, machines screaming warnings that made nurses rush around adjusting things. "I tried to tell you," she sobbed, "called so many times, left messages. You blocked me, thought you didn't want us, thought I had to do this alone." The accusation hit Ronan like he deserved, guilt crushing his chest until breathing hurt. "I didn't know," he said desperately. "I swear I never got your messages. My assistant screens everything. I didn't know you were pregnant, didn't know you were trying to reach me if I had known." Another contraction cut him off, Claire screaming, monitors going absolutely crazy, Dr. Huang's voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to do this now," she said firmly. "Claire, your blood pressure is critical. The baby's heart rate just dropped to dangerous levels. We have to operate immediately. You're going to have a stroke if we wait any longer." Claire shook her head frantically, panic overriding reason. "I'm scared," she cried. "What if something goes wrong? What if I die and he's alone? What if?" Ronan cupped her face with both hands, made her look at him, his eyes intense and focused entirely on her. "You're not alone," he said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. We're doing this together, you and me, right now." Claire searched his face desperately, looking for reassurance, looking for strength she didn't have anymore. "Promise me something," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Anything," Ronan meant it completely. "If I don't make it," Claire said, fresh tears falling, "take care of our son. Even though I kept him from you, even though I messed everything up, promise me he'll be loved. Promise me he won't be alone like I was." Ronan's throat went tight with emotion he hadn't felt in decades, with terror and determination and something that felt dangerously like love. "You're both going to be fine," he said fiercely. "I'm not losing either of you. Not now that I know you exist. I promise you that." Dr. Huang's voice was urgent now. "We're out of time. Mr. Ashford, you need to scrub in, stay with her through surgery, help keep her calm. Every second counts." Ronan nodded, squeezed Claire's hand one more time. "Don't leave me," she begged, her eyes locked on his with desperate trust that he didn't deserve. "Never," he promised, meaning it with everything he had. "I'm not going anywhere." Nurses were already moving, wheeling Claire's bed toward the operating room, Ronan following beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. They got him into a surgical gown somehow, got in position at Claire's head, while the surgical team prepped with terrifying efficiency, anesthesiologist working quickly to numb Claire while keeping her conscious enough to understand what was happening. "You'll feel pressure but no pain," the anesthesiologist explained, trying to make his voice soothing despite the urgency vibrating through the room. Claire's eyes never left Ronan's face, her hand gripping his like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to consciousness, to life, to the hope that this might work out. "Tell me about him," Ronan said desperately, needing to distract her, needing to keep her present. "About our son. What do you know about him?" Claire's voice was weak but steadier, focusing on the baby. "He kicks constantly," she whispered, "especially at night when I'm trying to sleep. I think he's going to be stubborn like his father, always fighting, always demanding attention." Ronan almost smiled despite the terror, felt something warm pierce through his fear. "You named him?" he asked. "Thought about it," Claire admitted, "but I wanted to wait, in case you ever came back, in case you wanted to say, saved all the decisions for you, even though I thought I'd never see you again." The admission destroyed something in Ronan's chest, rebuilt it differently. She'd waited 9 months hoping he'd return, hoping he'd care, while he'd forgotten she existed and built his empire higher. "I'm here now," he said fiercely, leaning close so only she could hear, "and I'm staying. We'll name him together. We'll do everything together. I swear it." Dr. Huang's voice cut through the moment, making first incision now, the words calm but carrying weight of life and death. Ronan kept his eyes on Claire's face, didn't watch the surgery, just focused on keeping her calm and present and alive. The next minutes felt like hours, surgical team working with coordinated precision, monitors beeping rhythm of 2 heartbeats, both struggling. Claire's grip on Ronan's hand tightening until his bones creaked, but he didn't complain, just held on and willed them both to survive. Then suddenly Dr. Huang's voice changed. "I see him," she said. "He's," and then alarm, piercing and terrible. "He's not breathing. Get NICU team in here now. We need resuscitation immediately." Claire tried to sit up, panic, overwhelming anesthesia. "What's happening? What's wrong with my baby?" Ronan held her shoulders gently but firmly, kept her from moving, from tearing stitches, from making everything worse, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched doctors pull their son free, but silent. No crying, no movement, just terrible stillness. The NICU team swarmed, tiny body disappearing under their efficient hands, working on impossibly small chest, breathing for him, fighting for him, while Ronan and Claire watched helplessly. "Please," Claire was sobbing, "please let him be okay. Please don't let him die, please." Ronan had no words, no comfort, just held her and prayed to a God he didn't believe in, bargained with forces he didn't acknowledge, promised anything and everything if their son would just breathe, just cry, just live. 30 seconds felt like eternity. The room holding collective breath, everyone watching the NICU team work with desperate hope. Then finally, mercifully, a sound, small and weak, but unmistakably there, a cry that transformed the room from crisis to cautious celebration. "He's breathing," someone said. "Vitals stabilizing, he's going to be okay." Claire collapsed in relief. Ronan holding her up, both of them crying, both of them destroyed and rebuilt by that tiny cry. Dr. Huang's voice carried relief and exhaustion. "He's small, but he's a fighter. Congratulations, you have a son." The NICU team worked with coordinated efficiency, stabilizing their son, while Ronan watched from across the operating room. Unable to move from Claire's side, but desperate to see the baby they'd almost lost. "He's 5 pounds even," one of the nurses announced, "small for full term, but his lungs are strong, APGAR scores improving rapidly. He's a fighter." Ronan felt something crack open in his chest. Emotions he'd spent 20 years suppressing, flooding through barriers he'd built to keep himself untouchable. This tiny person he'd known about for less than an hour was already rearranging his entire existence. Dr. Huang was finishing the surgery, closing incisions with practiced precision, her voice calm now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Ms. Mitchell, you did beautifully," she said. "Both of you are going to be fine. You need rest and recovery, but the worst is over." Claire's eyes were fixed on a corner where NICU team surrounded their son, tears streaming down her face. "Can I see him? Please, I need to see him. Need to know he's real." The head NICU nurse approached carrying a bundle wrapped in hospital blankets, her smile genuine and warm. "Just for a moment before we take him for observation," she said, settling the baby carefully against Claire's chest. "Skin-to-skin contact is important, even if brief." Ronan leaned close, seeing his son for the first time properly. Dark hair plastered against a tiny skull, features that were clearly his mixed with Claire's delicacy, impossibly small fists waving with uncoordinated determination. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but searching, some instinct making him turn toward Ronan's voice when he whispered hello. "Hi, baby," Claire whispered, her voice breaking with overwhelming emotion. "I'm your mama. I love you so much. You scared me so badly, but you're here now. You're perfect, and you're here." Ronan watched them together, his family that he'd known nothing about until tonight, feeling the weight of 9 months of Claire's solitary struggle, 9 months of her carrying this child alone, while he'd been too important to return her calls. The nurse's voice was gentle but firm. "I need to take him now. He needs monitoring in the NICU for a few hours, standard procedure for babies who had trouble breathing, but he's strong and healthy. You can see him again soon." Claire's hands clung to the baby for just a moment longer before releasing him, watching the nurse carry their son away with expression of pure anguish. Ronan took her hand, squeezed gently. "He's okay. They're just being careful. We'll see him again soon." Claire turned to look at him fully for the first time since he'd arrived, really seeing him now that the immediate crisis had passed. "We need to name him," she said, her voice exhausted but determined. "Before I fall asleep, before anything else happens, he needs a name." Ronan thought about it, about new beginnings and second chances, about this child who'd survived against odds. "What about Jackson?" he suggested, his voice quiet. "It means son of Jack. It means new beginning," felt appropriate for what this is. Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she was smiling. "Jackson," she repeated, testing the name. "Jackson Ashford. It's perfect. He's perfect." Her eyes were closing now, exhaustion and medication finally winning. Ronan watching her fight to stay conscious even though her body desperately needed rest. "Sleep," he said gently. "I'll be here when you wake up. I'm not going anywhere." "Stay," Claire mumbled, her hand tightening weakly on his. "Promise you'll stay." "I promise," Ronan said, and meant it with an intensity that should have terrified him. "I'm not leaving either of you ever again." Claire's breathing evened out into sleep, nurses moving her to recovery while Ronan followed, refusing to let her out of his sight. The recovery room was quiet, just Claire and 2 other sleeping patients, monitors beeping steady reassurance that everyone was stable. Ronan settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Claire's bed, his hand still holding hers, his mind trying to process everything that had happened in the past 2 hours. He'd gone from sleeping peacefully to being a father, from complete ignorance to crushing responsibility, from alone to having family he hadn't known he wanted. Felix appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral but curiosity obvious in his eyes. "Boss, everything okay? You left in a hurry." Ronan looked at his second-in-command, the man who'd helped him build everything, who knew his secrets and his methods, who'd never seen him show weakness or attachment to anything except power. "I have a son," Ronan said, the words feeling surreal leaving his mouth, Felix's eyes widening with genuine shock. "The waitress from 9 months ago," Ronan continued. "She was pregnant, tried to tell me. I blocked her calls. Now she just almost died delivering our baby, and I had no idea any of this was happening." Felix processed this information with a strategic mind that made him valuable, implications clicking into place behind his careful expression. "What do you need?" he asked, understanding that Ronan's world had just fundamentally changed. "What can I do?" Ronan thought about it, about what Claire and Jackson would need, about the life they'd been living while he'd forgotten they existed. "Find out everything about Claire Mitchell," he said quietly, "where she's been living, what she's been doing, how she's been surviving. I need to know what the past 9 months looked like for her." Felix nodded, already pulling out his phone to make it happen. "Anything else?" "Clear my schedule for the next week," Ronan continued. "Cancel everything that isn't absolutely critical. I'm staying here until they're both stable, until I know they're okay." Felix's expression showed surprise, because Ronan never cleared his schedule, never put anything above the Empire, but he just nodded. "Consider it done. I'll handle everything. You focus on your family." The word family hit Ronan strange and new, concept he'd never applied to himself before. But looking at Claire sleeping and knowing Jackson was somewhere in this building fighting to be healthy, it felt accurate despite the impossibility. Hours passed in that recovery room, Ronan refusing to leave despite nurses suggesting he could go home and rest, could come back in the morning when Claire would be more alert. He ignored them all, kept his vigil beside her bed, watching her breathe and thinking about how close he'd come to losing her without ever knowing. Felix returned with information, his expression troubled in ways that made Ronan's stomach tighten. "Talk," he demanded. "Tell me everything." Felix sat in the other chair, pulled up documents on his tablet, started reading with clinical detachment that couldn't hide the grimness of the story. Claire Mitchell, 26 years old, parents died in car accident when she was 20, no other family, no support system. She's been working at 3 different restaurants, picking up shifts whenever possible, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots are normal background noise. Ronan's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Let Felix continue. "Bank records show she's been barely surviving. Every dollar going to rent and food, no savings, no insurance until the pregnancy. Then she qualified for state assistance. Medical records show she had her first prenatal appointment at a free clinic at 8 weeks, regular checkups after that, all documented warnings about high blood pressure and preeclampsia risk. The doctors told her she needed to reduce stress," Felix said, looking up from the tablet. "Told her she was working too much, needed help and support. She kept working 3 jobs until she went into labor tonight, collapsed during her shift at the restaurant. Coworkers called the ambulance." Ronan felt sick, physically ill, imagining Claire working herself to exhaustion while pregnant, struggling alone through every difficulty, handling everything by herself because he'd been too important to return her calls. "What about attempts to contact me?" he asked, his voice tight. "Tell me exactly what happened." Felix pulled up phone records, showed Ronan the timeline. "First call to your office 12 weeks into pregnancy. She left a message with your assistant asking you to call back. Said it was personal and important. Your assistant flagged it as potential scheme per standard protocol. Never passed it along. Second call 2 weeks later, more urgent message. Specifically mentioned that she needed to discuss something about the night you'd spent together. Your assistant told her you weren't interested in reconnecting with casual encounters, suggested she not call again. Third call at 16 weeks. Claire left a detailed message saying she was pregnant and needed to speak with you about the baby. That call got her number blocked completely as potential extortion attempt. Ronan's hands clenched into fists, rage building not at Felix or his assistant, but at himself, at the protection systems he'd built that had worked too perfectly. She tried 3 times, he said, his voice hollow. 3 times she reached out for help, and I shut her down, told her I didn't care, blocked her completely. Felix's expression was carefully neutral, but sympathy showed through. Your security protocols worked exactly as designed. He said, we block people trying to get to you through personal connections. We assume everyone has an agenda. 99 times out of 100 we're right to do that. But this was the one time we were wrong. Ronan finished. This was the time someone genuinely needed to reach me, and we treated her like a threat. He looked at Claire, sleeping peacefully now, recovering from surgery that almost killed her, carrying his child alone for 9 months because he'd made himself unreachable. I failed her, he said quietly, failed them both. She tried to tell me, and I blocked her out, let her think I didn't want them, let her struggle alone when I could have helped. What are you going to do now? Felix asked, because the past can't be changed, only the future. Ronan stood, restless energy making sitting impossible, paced the small recovery room trying to think through implications and options. They need support, he said. Claire needs to recover without working herself to death. Jackson needs everything a baby requires, medical care, safe home, actual future instead of poverty. So you'll provide financially, Felix said, understanding, set them up somewhere safe, make sure they're taken care of. Ronan shook his head. That's baseline, that's minimum responsibility. I'm talking about more than money. I'm talking about being present, being a father, being part of their lives. Felix's eyebrows rose slightly, surprise breaking through his professional mask. You're going to be involved, actively, like raising the kid yourself. Yes, Ronan said firmly. Jackson is my son. Claire is the mother of my child. They're my responsibility now. I'm not walking away from that. Felix considered this, calculated implications the way he always did. That changes security considerations significantly. He said, makes them potential targets for anyone who wants to hurt you, makes them leverage in ways that could be dangerous. I know, Ronan replied, which is why we're going to make sure they're protected properly, comprehensively. Nobody gets near them without going through me first. Claire stirred then, her eyes fluttering open, immediately searching the room until they found Ronan. You stayed, she said, her voice rough with sleep and emotion. You actually stayed. I promised I would, Ronan said, returning to the chair beside her bed, taking her hand again. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, Claire admitted, trying to smile, but wincing with pain from the incision. But alive, we're both alive. Jackson's okay. He is, Ronan confirmed. He's in NICU being monitored, but the nurses say he's strong, doing well. We can see him soon if you're feeling up to it. Claire's expression transformed with desperate longing. I need to see him, she said, trying to sit up and gasping with pain from the movement. Need to make sure he's real, that this isn't a dream. Easy, Ronan said, supporting her carefully. The surgery was major. You need to take it slow. Let me get a wheelchair. We'll go see him together. The nurse helped transfer Claire from bed to wheelchair, careful of 4 lines and surgical drains, wrapping her in warm blankets and making sure she was stable. Ronan pushed the chair himself, following directions to the NICU, both of them silent with anticipation and nerves. The NICU was bright and sterile, rows of incubators containing tiny fighting humans, machines beeping steady reassurance that everyone was being monitored. The nurse led them to Jackson Station, their son lying in a clear bassinet under warming lights, no longer needing the full incubator now that his breathing was stable. He was awake, dark eyes open and searching, tiny body moving with uncoordinated purpose. Claire reached for him immediately, Ronan helping her lift Jackson carefully, settling their son against her chest, where he immediately calmed, recognizing something fundamental about his mother's heartbeat and warmth. Hi, baby, Claire whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. Mama's here. Mama loves you so much. You're so perfect, so strong. You fought so hard to be here. Ronan watched them together, feeling something massive shift in his chest, some fundamental restructuring of priorities and purposes that he couldn't articulate but felt with absolute certainty. This was his family, these two people he'd known nothing about hours ago. They were his responsibility and his future and his reason for everything that came next. "Can I?" he asked hesitantly, unsure of protocol, unsure if he had the right to ask. Claire looked up at him, saw the vulnerability in his expression, smiled despite her exhaustion and pain. "He's your son too," she said, handing Jackson carefully to Ronan, teaching him how to support the tiny head, how to cradle the small body against his chest. Jackson made small sounds of protest at the transfer, but settled quickly, some instinct recognizing his father's heartbeat the way he'd recognized his mother's. Ronan looked down at his son, this impossibly small person who existed because of one perfect night 9 months ago, feeling the weight of responsibility and terror and love he'd never imagined he could feel. "Hi, Jackson," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "I'm your dad. I'm sorry I'm late. Sorry I wasn't here for your mom. Sorry for everything. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving, I promise you that." Jackson's tiny hand wrapped around Ronan's finger, grip surprisingly strong for someone so small, and Ronan felt that grip wrap around his heart just as firmly. "This is my son," he thought. "This is my child, my responsibility, my future. Everything I am now exists to protect him and Claire, to make sure they never struggle alone again, to be the father and partner they deserve." They sat together in the NICU, taking turns holding Jackson, both exhausted but unwilling to leave, unwilling to let their son out of sight after coming so close to losing him. Claire dozed in the wheelchair, her head against Ronan's shoulder, Jackson sleeping in Ronan's arms. And for the first time in his adult life, Ronan felt complete, felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what mattered most. Felix had texted updates about business, but Ronan barely glanced at them, his empire suddenly feeling less important than the tiny human sleeping against his chest. The NICU nurse approached with gentle professionalism, suggested that Claire needed to return to her room for rest and medication, that Jackson would be fine under their observation. Claire resisted, wanted to stay close to her son, but exhaustion was winning and pain medication was wearing off. Ronan made the decision for both of them, promised Claire they'd come back first thing in the morning, that Jackson would be safe and monitored, that she needed to focus on healing so she could take care of their son properly. Claire relented reluctantly, let Ronan wheel her back to recovery, settled into bed with obvious relief despite her desire to stay in NICU. "We need to talk," she said, her voice heavy with impending sleep, "about what happens next, about what this means." "Tomorrow," Ronan said gently, "when you're more rested, when we've both processed everything, we'll figure it out together." Claire's hand found his, squeezed weakly. "You're really staying? Really going to be part of this, not just tonight, but afterward, when things are hard and complicated and not dramatic anymore?" "I'm staying," Ronan confirmed, meeting her eyes directly so she could see his certainty. "I'm not going anywhere. Claire, you're stuck with me now, both of you." A smile crossed her exhausted face, the first real smile he'd seen from her tonight. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we'll figure it out together." She fell asleep holding his hand, Ronan staying in the uncomfortable chair because he'd promised not to leave, watching her breathe and thinking about how completely his life had changed in the span of hours. This morning he'd been alone and untouchable, focused entirely on his empire, measuring success by power and control and the fear he inspired in enemies. Tonight he was a father, partner to a woman he barely knew but felt connected to in fundamental ways, responsible for 2 lives that depended on him for more than just money or protection. His phone buzzed with messages from his organization, problems that needed his attention, decisions only he could make, but for the first time in 20 years Ronan ignored them, let his empire wait while he sat beside Claire's bed and made silent promises about the kind of father he'd become, the kind of partner he'd try to be, the kind of man Jackson and Claire deserved. 3 days passed in the hospital before doctors cleared Claire and Jackson for discharge. 3 days of Ronan learning to be a father through trial and error. 3 days of watching Claire recover, while guilt and determination warred in his chest. The nurses taught him everything with patience that surprised him, how to change diapers on someone impossibly small, how to hold Jackson during feeding without supporting his head wrong, how to read the different cries that meant hungry versus tired versus uncomfortable. Ronan absorbed it all like he was learning new territory in his empire, taking mental notes and asking questions until he understood completely, determined to be competent at this even though everything about it terrified him. Claire watched from her hospital bed as Ronan transformed from dangerous criminal boss to awkward new father, saw him handle their son with gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation suggested. "You're good at this," she said on the second day, watching Ronan burp Jackson with careful precision, "better than I expected considering you just found out he existed." "I'm learning," Ronan replied, his focus entirely on Jackson, trying to understand what I missed. "What you handled alone for 9 months feels like I need to catch up fast." "You don't have to catch up in 3 days," Claire said, her voice gentle but tired. "This isn't a competition. There's no deadline for becoming a perfect father." "But there should have been 9 months of preparation," Ronan countered, his guilt visible despite his controlled expression. 9 months of appointments and planning and being present. "You did all of that alone because I was too important to return phone calls." Claire was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I was angry about that," she admitted, "angry for months that you blocked me out, that you made me feel like I didn't matter enough to deserve a response. But watching you now, seeing how you've shown up despite everything, I'm starting to understand it wasn't personal rejection. It was your life, your security, your systems doing what they're designed to do." "That doesn't make it right," Ronan said firmly. "Doesn't excuse the fact that you struggled alone, that you almost died because you had no support. My systems failed you and Jackson in the worst possible way." Jackson made a small sound, drawing both their attention, his tiny face scrunching up in the way that meant he was about to cry. Ronan adjusted his hold, started the gentle, bouncing motion the nurses had taught him, whispered soothing nonsense until Jackson settled again. Claire watched this with expression that mixed wonder and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. "You're really trying," she said softly, "really committed to this. I wasn't sure you would be after the crisis passed." Ronan looked at her directly, his eyes intense. "I made promises in that delivery room," he said, "promises I intend to keep. Jackson is my son, and you're his mother. That makes you both my responsibility, my priority, my family, however we define that." The word family made Claire's eyes fill with tears, hormones, and exhaustion, making emotions overwhelming. "I haven't had family since my parents died," she whispered. 6 years of being completely alone, of having no one who cared if I lived or died. I got used to it, convinced myself I didn't need anyone. Then Jackson happened, and suddenly I was responsible for someone else, but still alone, still handling everything myself. "You're not alone anymore," Ronan said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You have me now, have my resources and protection and whatever support you need. I know that doesn't erase 9 months of struggle, but it's what I can offer going forward." Claire studied him carefully, tried to read beneath the intensity, trying to understand what he was really offering. "What does that look like practically?" she asked. "You supporting us, being present. Where do you see this going?" Ronan had been thinking about this constantly for 3 days, planning like he planned territory expansion, strategizing like he strategized business deals. "I bought a house," he said, watching her face for reaction. "Gated community with security, safe neighborhood, proper space for Jackson to grow up." Claire's eyes widened, shock replacing wariness. "You bought a house in 3 days," her voice rising slightly. "That's insane. That's too much. I can't accept that." "You're recovering from major surgery," Ronan said calmly. "You can't go back to your 1-bedroom apartment in a dangerous neighborhood where you'd be alone with a newborn. You need help and security and space to heal properly." "I have my apartment," Claire protested, her independence fighting against accepting help she desperately needed. "I can manage like I planned to before you showed up." "Managing isn't thriving," Ronan countered, his business mind showing through. "Managing is surviving day to day, without building anything better. Jackson deserves better than that. You deserve better than that." "What about what you deserve?" Claire asked, her voice sharp with something like anger. "You didn't sign up for instant family, didn't choose to have a child. This was forced on you by biology and bad timing. You don't owe us your entire life." Ronan set Jackson carefully in the hospital bassinet, turned to face Claire fully, his expression more open than she'd seen it. That night 9 months ago meant something. He said quietly, even before I knew about Jackson. That connection was real. I felt it, and I know you did too. I failed to follow up, failed to see what we could have built, but I'm not failing again. He moved closer to her bed, took her hand carefully. I'm not offering this out of obligation. He continued, I'm offering because Jackson is my son and I want to know him. Want to be his father. And you, he paused, searching for words. You're not just the mother of my child. You're the woman who gave me the most real night of my life, who I forgot about and regret forgetting every single day. Claire's tears fell freely now, overwhelmed by his honesty and intensity and the massive changes happening too fast to process. I'm scared, she admitted, scared of depending on you and having you leave when this gets hard, scared of Jackson getting attached and losing you, scared of letting myself believe this is real. Ronan understood that fear, understood the trauma of loss and the self-protection that came from being alone. I can't promise perfection, he said. Can't promise I won't make mistakes because I definitely will. This is all new to me. I don't know how to be a father or a partner or anything except the person I've been building for 20 years. But I promise to show up, to try, to not disappear when things get complicated. The conversation was interrupted by nurses bringing medication and checking vitals, by doctors explaining discharge procedures and post-surgery care instructions. Ronan absorbed everything, asked questions about warning signs and follow-up appointments, made sure he understood exactly what Claire would need during recovery. The house is ready, he said when they had privacy again, fully furnished, nursery equipped, staffed to help with whatever you need during recovery. All you have to do is say yes. Claire looked at Jackson sleeping peacefully in his bassinet, looked at Ronan's intense expression, made the decision that terrified and relieved her equally. Okay, she said quietly, but this is temporary trial, not permanent commitment. We take this slow, figure out what we are before making it permanent. Agreed, Ronan said, relief flooding through him. We build this together, no pressure, no expectations beyond taking care of Jackson and giving you space to heal. The next day, they left the hospital as a family. Ronan carrying Jackson's car seat with careful precision, Claire moving slowly beside him, still in pain from surgery. His car waited at the entrance, driver and security present, but giving them space, the car seat installed perfectly because Ronan had made sure of it. The drive to the house was quiet, Claire looking out the window at neighborhoods she'd never been able to afford, wondering what her life was becoming. The house was beautiful and overwhelming, exactly like Ronan had described, gated community with security gates and guards who nodded respectfully at their arrival. Inside was even more perfect, decorated with taste that Claire never would have associated with a criminal boss. Everything coordinated and welcoming. The nursery made her cry, painted in soft colors with quality furniture and every item a baby could possibly need. The crib position where morning light would fall gently, rocking chair by the window for night feedings. This is too much, Claire whispered, looking around at the perfection. I don't deserve this. Ronan set Jackson's car seat down carefully, turned to face Claire with intensity that made her breath catch. You deserve everything, he said firmly. You carry my son alone for 9 months, worked 3 jobs while pregnant, survived complications that almost killed you. You deserve everything good I can possibly provide. The master bedroom was connected to the nursery through a door that could stay open for easy access during night wakings, huge bed with soft linens, bathroom with deep tub that Claire stared at longingly. When was the last time you took a real bath? Ronan asked, watching her face. Can't remember, Claire admitted. My apartment only had a shower, and that broke half the time. There's a nurse on staff for the first few weeks, Ronan explained. Showed her the guest room where a kind-faced woman named Patricia was already unpacking. She'll help with Jackson, with your recovery, with whatever you need so you can focus on healing. Claire met Patricia, who smiled warmly and immediately started explaining her background in postpartum care, her experience with newborns, her approach to helping without taking over. I'm here to support you, Patricia said gently. Not to replace you. You're the mother. I'm just extra hands and knowledge when you need it. The first week in the house was adjustment and learning. Claire's body healing slowly, while Patricia helped with the overnight feedings that surgery made difficult. Ronan was there every morning by 6, taking over so Claire could sleep longer, learning Jackson's patterns and preferences, changing diapers and giving bottles, and walking their son around the house while talking to him about everything and nothing. Felix handled the empire with minimal interruption, Ronan working from the home office during Jackson's naps. But his focus had fundamentally shifted, business no longer consuming his every thought. Claire watched the transformation with cautious hope, saw Ronan become genuinely good at fatherhood despite never having example to follow, saw him patient with Jackson's crying and tireless during difficult nights, and completely devoted in ways that seemed impossible for someone with his reputation. "You're different here," she said one evening, watching him rock Jackson to sleep. "Different than I imagined you'd be. Different than your reputation suggests." Ronan looked up from their son, his expression thoughtful. "I'm different than I've ever been," he admitted. "Jackson changes everything. Makes me question priorities I thought were permanent. Makes me want to be better than the man I built myself into." "What kind of man did you build?" Claire asked, genuinely curious about the life he'd led before they collided. "The kind who values power over people," Ronan said honestly, "who uses fear as currency and violence as solution, who built empire on things I'm not proud of, things I can't undo but can choose not to continue." "Are you saying you'd change your entire life?" Claire asked carefully. "Give up everything you've built because of one night and an accidental baby?" Ronan settled Jackson in the bassinet, turned to face Claire fully. "You're not accidental," he said quietly. "Jackson isn't a mistake. Finding you again isn't coincidence. This feels like the universe giving me chance to be something different, someone better, and I'd be fooled to ignore that." 2 months passed in rhythm and routine. Jackson growing stronger and more alert. Claire healing until surgery scars faded and her body felt like her own again. Patricia remained helpful but less necessary as they learned to handle everything themselves, as they became actual team instead of strangers sharing space. Ronan still went to his penthouse sometimes, but came back every morning, spent every evening with them, ate dinner at the kitchen table while Jackson slept nearby, talked about their days like actual couple instead of people coexisting out of obligation. Claire found herself laughing at Ronan's stories, found herself missing him when he wasn't there, found herself falling for him in slow, steady progression that terrified and thrilled her. One night, after Jackson was asleep, Claire found Ronan in the kitchen, making tea like he belonged there. "We should talk," she said, her voice nervous but determined, "about what we're doing, about what this is becoming." Ronan turned from the kettle, gave her his full attention the way he always did. "What do you want it to become?" he asked, his voice careful, neutral, giving her space to define this. Claire moved closer, gathered courage from somewhere deep. "This temporary arrangement," she said, "living here while I recover, you visiting daily, it's actually working really well, but I think we should make a decision about what happens next." Ronan's expression was carefully controlled, but hope showed through. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stop going back to your penthouse," Claire said, her heart hammering. "Stay here completely, with us, be family, not just visitor, figure out what we are together instead of separately." Ronan's breath caught, emotion flickering across his face before he controlled it. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Sure about letting me stay, about giving this real chance, about risking that level of vulnerability?" Claire touched his face gently, bold in ways she wouldn't have been months ago. "That night 9 months ago wasn't just chemistry," she said, repeating words he'd said to her in the hospital. "It was real. I felt it, and you felt it. Let's find out if it's still there beneath all the chaos and fear." Ronan pulled her close, careful of her still healing body, his arms around her, feeling safe and right in ways that shouldn't work this fast. "I'd like that," he said against her hair. "More than anything, I'd like that." They stood together in the kitchen while their son slept upstairs. Family accidentally created, now choosing to become real, on purpose, with intention. That night Ronan brought his remaining things from the penthouse, moved fully into the master bedroom, into the life they were building together. Nothing happened physically that first night sharing bed, just sleeping beside each other, building trust and intimacy slowly. But Claire felt the shift, felt them becoming actual couple instead of co-parents sharing space. Weeks continued in deepening connection, Ronan and Claire learning each other beyond crisis and necessity, discovering compatibility in daily life, in morning routines and evening conversations, and 1,000 small moments that built relationships. Jackson thrived on the stability, growing and developing. First smile lighting up both their faces with pride, first laugh making them both cry with joy. They were becoming family, real family, not just biology, but choice. Then one evening Ronan came home from a rare meeting at his office, his expression troubled in ways that made Claire nervous. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Did something happen?" "We need to talk," Ronan said, his voice serious, "about my business, about what I do, about things you need to know before this goes further." Claire sat beside Ronan on the couch, Jackson sleeping peacefully in his nearby bassinet, her stomach tight with anticipation of whatever confession was coming. "I need to tell you the truth about my life," Ronan said, his voice quiet but firm, "about what I do, what I've done, what kind of man you're choosing to build a life with." Claire nodded, reaching for his hand because whatever this was she wanted to face it connected to him. "I know you're powerful," she said carefully, "know you run businesses that probably aren't all legal. I'm not naive, Ronan. I understood that from the beginning." "It's more than that," Ronan continued, his eyes meeting hers with brutal honesty. "I've built my empire on violence and fear. I've hurt people who threatened me. I've made choices that cost lives. I'm not a good man by most standards. I'm the person other criminals fear, the one who shows no mercy to enemies. I've done things I can't undo and wouldn't want Jackson to know about." Claire listened without interrupting, feeling the weight of his confession, understanding he was giving her chance to walk away before she was in too deep. "But," Ronan said, his voice changing slightly, "Jackson changes everything. You change everything. I don't want to be that man anymore. Don't want my son growing up around violence and danger. Don't want him learning that power comes from fear." "What are you saying?" Claire asked. "That you're going to change your entire life because of us?" "I'm saying I'm already changing," Ronan replied. "Been thinking about this since the night Jackson was born, about what kind of legacy I want to leave him, what kind of father I want to be. Can't do that while running criminal empire. Can't teach him to be a good man while being the opposite myself." "This is huge," Claire said carefully, "transitioning your entire business, giving up the power you've built. That takes time and planning and probably danger." 2 years, Ronan said, already worked out timeline with Felix. 2 years to sell operations, transition to legitimate businesses, build clean empire that Jackson can inherit without shame. "Are you doing this for us or for yourself?" Claire asked, "because I need to know your motivation is real, not just guilt or obligation." "Both," Ronan admitted. "Doing it because I want to be man you and Jackson deserve, but also because I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of violence being first solution, tired of being alone in fortress of my own making. You've given me reason to want something different, something better." Claire studied his face, saw sincerity and vulnerability he rarely showed, made her decision with heart hammering but certainty solid. "Okay," she said quietly, "if you're serious about changing, about building legitimate future, then I'm in. We're in this together." Relief flooded Ronan's expression, tension leaving his shoulders as he pulled Claire close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for trusting me, for giving me this chance, for believing I can be better." They kissed then, properly kissed for first time since that night 9 months ago. Chemistry still there, but deeper now, built on foundation of shared experience and genuine connection. The kiss intensified, months of restraint and careful distance dissolving in a heat and need. Ronan's hands gentle but desperate, Claire responding with equal intensity. They made love that night, with Jackson sleeping peacefully nearby, reclaiming what they'd had that first night, but building it into something more meaningful, something that acknowledged the family they'd created and were choosing to build. Afterwards, lying tangled together, Claire's head on Ronan's chest, listening to his heartbeat, she felt complete in ways she hadn't since her parents died. Felt like she had family again, people who belonged to her and she to them. "I love you," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Probably too soon to say it, but it's true. "I love you, Ronan." His arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion when he replied. "I love you too. Have loved you since that first night, even when I forgot you. Loved you more watching you be strong for Jackson. Loved you most for giving me a chance to be part of this. You and Jackson are everything to me now. The transition Ronan planned took exactly 2 years like he'd predicted, 2 years of careful maneuvering and strategic sales, 2 years of converting criminal operations into legitimate businesses, 2 years of building clean empire while raising Jackson together. Claire watched him transform from dangerous criminal boss into legitimate businessman, saw him make hard choices and sacrifice power for family, saw him become the man he wanted to be instead of the man circumstances had made him. She enrolled in school, finished her degree with Ronan's support and encouragement, discovered she had talent for business management that Ronan immediately utilized in his legitimate operations. They became partners in every sense, Claire handling aspects of the business she understood, Ronan valuing her insight and intelligence, building empire together that was clean and sustainable and something Jackson could inherit proudly. Felix remained loyal through the transition, respected Ronan's choices even when they cost profit, understood that family had become more valuable than power. The organization that had been built on fear transformed into a legitimate corporation that operated legally and ethically. Ronan's reputation shifting from dangerous criminal to respected businessman who'd turned his life around. Jackson grew into a healthy, happy toddler. First steps celebrated by both parents. First words making them both cry with pride. His personality emerging as stubborn and determined and surprisingly gentle. He looked like Ronan, but had Claire's kindness, had his father's intelligence, but his mother's empathy. Perfect combination of them both. On Jackson's second birthday, they threw a party at the house. Small gathering of friends and Ronan's trusted associates who'd become legitimate employees. Celebration of how far they'd all come. Claire watched Ronan play with their son, watch him be patient and gentle and completely present, felt overwhelming gratitude that she'd made that desperate call 2 years ago. That evening after guests left and Jackson was asleep, Ronan found Claire in the kitchen cleaning up, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I have something for you," he said, his voice carrying nervousness she rarely heard. Claire turned in his arms, saw him holding a small jewelry box, her breath catching because she knew what this was. 2 years ago, I got a call that changed my entire life, Ronan said, his eyes intense on hers, a desperate woman in labor with my son, calling because she had no other choice, trusting me despite every reason not to. That call gave me everything, gave me Jackson, gave me you, gave me reason to become a better man. You've been my partner through everything, Ronan continued, his voice thick with emotion, through transition and change and building this life. You've raised Jackson with me, built business with me, loved me despite knowing exactly who I was and choosing to believe I could be different. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was simple and elegant and perfect. Marry me, Claire, not because of Jackson, not because of obligation, but because I love you completely, because I can't imagine life without you, because you saved me in every way person can be saved. Claire was crying before he finished, nodding because words wouldn't come past the overwhelming emotion. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, absolutely yes, I'll marry you. Ronan slid the ring on her finger, kissed her deeply, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other like they'd never let go. They were married 3 months later in simple ceremony at the house, just close friends and family. Jackson, his ring bearer, toddling down makeshift aisle, making everyone laugh. Claire wore simple white dress, Ronan in suit that made him look less dangerous and more like the man he'd become. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves about second chances and showing up and building family from crisis. Felix stood as best man, gave toast about watching his boss transform from untouchable criminal to devoted father and husband, about how love had accomplished what nothing else could, making dangerous man choose vulnerability over power. Patricia attended with tears in her eyes, having watched them grow from strangers in a family, having helped them through those early, difficult weeks. Claire's former co-workers from the restaurant came, shocked and happy to see her thriving, to see the waitress who'd barely survived become successful businesswoman married to man who clearly adored her. The reception was joy and celebration, dancing and laughter and toast to new beginnings. Jackson passed between guests who all loved him. Happy chaos of family gathering. That night, after everyone left and Jackson was finally asleep, Ronan and Claire stood on their bedroom balcony looking at stars. "Can you believe this?" Claire asked, leaning against him. "2 years ago, I was alone and pregnant working 3 jobs. Now I'm here married to you with beautiful son and actual future." "I almost didn't answer that call," Ronan admitted, his arms around her. "Almost let it go to voicemail. Would have lost everything if I had. You and Jackson and this entire life we've built." "But you did answer," Claire said, turning in his arms to face him. "You came when we needed you most. You chose us over everything else. You became the father and partner we deserved." "We saved each other," Ronan replied, his forehead against hers. "You gave me reason to be better. I gave you support to thrive. Jackson gave us both purpose beyond ourselves. We built this together from broken pieces into something beautiful." They stood together under the stars, their son sleeping peacefully inside, their family complete and real and chosen, proving that sometimes the calls that wake you in darkness are the ones that save your life in every way that matters. Years passed in happiness and purpose. Claire and Ronan building business empire that was completely legitimate and incredibly successful. Jackson growing into intelligent, kind boy who knew his parents' story and understood that people could change when motivated by love. They had another child, daughter named Sophie, who had Claire's eyes and Ronan's determination. Jackson proving to be devoted, protective big brother. The family thrived in ways neither Claire nor Ronan had imagined possible during that desperate night in the hospital. Their love growing deeper through challenges and triumphs, through daily partnership and shared purpose. Ronan's reputation transformed completely, known now not as dangerous criminal, but as businessman who'd turned his life around, who'd chosen family over power, who proved redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. He spoke sometimes at business conferences about transformation and second chances, about how crisis could become catalyst for fundamental change, about how love could accomplish what nothing else could. Claire finished her MBA, became equal partner in their business ventures, her intelligence and insight invaluable, respected in her own right not just as Ronan's wife, but as successful businesswoman who'd built herself from poverty into prosperity. Jackson's 5th birthday party was huge celebration. Family and friends gathering to celebrate boy who'd almost not made it, who'd been born in crisis but thrived in love. Ronan watched his son blow out candles, make wish with eyes squeezed shut and determination on his face, felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they'd built. Claire found him, slid her hand into his, smiled at him with love that had only grown stronger. "What are you thinking?" she asked, watching him study their children. "About that night," Ronan admitted. "The call that changed everything, how close I came to not answering, to missing all of this, terrifies me how easily I could have lost you both." "But you didn't," Claire said firmly, squeezing his hand. "You answered, you came, you stayed, you chose us every single day since. That's what matters, not the what-ifs, but the reality we built." Jackson ran over then, chocolate cake on his face, threw himself at both parents with 5-year-old enthusiasm. "Best birthday ever," he declared. "Best family ever. I love you, Mama and Daddy." Ronan lifted his son, held him close, met Claire's eyes over Jackson's head. "Best family ever," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I never knew I needed, everything I'd give up anything to keep." That night after children were asleep and guests had gone home, Ronan and Claire sat on their bedroom balcony like they had on their wedding night. Comfortable silence between them. 5 years, Claire mused, 5 years since that desperate call, since I broke my promise to myself and asked for help. Best decision I ever made, even though I was terrified. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Ronan replied, pulling her close, "you calling, me answering, finding out about Jackson. All of it led to this, to family I never thought I deserved, to love I didn't know existed, to life that means something beyond power and control." "We should tell Jackson the full story someday," Claire said thoughtfully, "when he's old enough to understand, about how Daddy almost didn't know he existed, about how Mama almost did everything alone, about how one phone call changed 3 lives completely." "We will," Ronan agreed, Tell him about second chances and showing up and choosing love over pride, about how family can be built from crisis into something beautiful, about how answering when someone calls for help can transform everything. They sat together under familiar stars, their children sleeping peacefully inside, their love tested and proven through years of partnership and purpose, their family complete and chosen and real. Claire thought about the alternate timeline sometimes, the one where she kept her desperate promise to herself, where she'd done everything alone, where Ronan never knew his son and Jackson never knew his father, where pride and hurt had destroyed what they could have. Grateful every single day that she'd been brave enough to make that call, that Ronan had been there enough to answer, that they'd both chosen vulnerability over protection, family over isolation, love over fear. The call had come at 2 in the morning in crisis and desperation, but had saved 3 lives in ways that mattered more than survival, had created family where there was loneliness, had built love where there was emptiness, had transformed 3 broken people into something whole and beautiful together. Ronan held his wife under the stars, thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, alone and powerful and empty without knowing it, thought about how close he'd come to missing everything that mattered. That 2 a.m. call had woken him from more than just sleep, had woken him from life lived without real purpose, without genuine connection, without love that demanded vulnerability and offered everything in return. He'd answered because something made him, instinct or fate or universe giving him one chance to get it right. And answering had given him everything, family and love and reason to be better man than he'd ever imagined becoming. Jackson and Sophie asleep inside, Claire in his arms, legitimate business built on ethics instead of fear, life that had meaning beyond power and control, all of it traced back to one desperate call in darkness, one decision to answer, one choice to show up when needed most. Ronan understood now that real strength wasn't violence or intimidation or the fear he inspired in enemies. Real strength was vulnerability, showing up even when terrified, choosing love even when it meant risk, building family even when easier to stay alone. That 2 a.m. call had taught him everything that mattered, had given him everything he'd never known he needed, had transformed him from a man who controlled everything in a man who understood that some things were worth surrendering control for. Claire and Ronan sat together as the night deepened, their children safe inside, their love solid and real and tested by time, their family chosen and built and maintained through daily choice to show up, to try, to love despite fear. 5 years since that desperate midnight call, 5 years of transformation and growth, 5 years of proving that crisis could become catalyst, that failure could become foundation, that love could accomplish what nothing else could. The call that had woken Ronan from sleep had woken him to life worth living, to family worth everything, to love that transformed not just circumstances but souls, and neither of them would ever regret that Claire had been brave enough to call or that Ronan had been wise enough to answer. If this story of second chances and showing up when it matters moved you, then smash that subscribe button right now. Hit that notification bell, because we're creating more powerful stories about people who answer the call even when they've failed before. Comment below what you would have done if you got that desperate midnight call from someone you've forgotten. Share this with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to show up and make things right. Every view helps us spread the message that real love means choosing to be present even when it's hard, and that one moment of answering can change everything forever. Drop that like immediately, subscribe, and turn on notifications to join our family of people who believe in second chances and transformation through love. You won't regret it, because these stories prove that the calls that wake us in darkness are often the ones that save our lives in every way that matters.